Natural causes, accidental, suicide, homicide, or undetermined. Those 5 categories constitute the manners of death most commonly referred to by coroners and medical examiners. Almost every departure from this earthly realm is classified using one of those terms. Yet such words seem inadequate, cold even, when they are describing the passing of someone near and dear to our hearts. And if they are being used in connection with the sudden, unexplained, violent death of one of your children, it's easy to see that no words would ever be sufficient. But what if events unfolded in a way which defies any such explanation or categorization? Or worse yet, if more than one word was deployed by the supposed experts as they seek to assign some tag of rationality to your loss? This has been the situation for the family of Daniel Reed, DJ Smith, who was found on the railroad tracks in a woody, swampy stretch of Dorchester County, South Carolina on August 11, 2018. For nearly 5 years, the family of DJ Smith has been left to wonder what happened to him after he walked away from a party in the middle of the night, under disputed circumstances. His badly damaged body recovered 18 hours later along a railroad track near Ridgeville, South Carolina. This is the 4th part of our investigation into the mysterious death of the boy with the contagious smile whose mother somehow sensed he was gone long before anyone told her what she already knew. If you're new to this story, it only makes sense to go back and listen to the first 3 parts of our series. You'll want the background to make sense of what's to come, because this story, as we have been telling it, is starting to move in a new and unexpected direction. One reason for that? The results and analysis and reanalysis of DJ's autopsy. During the first 3 parts of this story, we've told you how the investigation into DJ's death failed to yield anything resembling the answers his family so desperately needed, and the accountability the public deserved. Upon providing formal notice of his death, officials from the Dorchester County Coroner's Office told DJ's mother he had been murdered and his body placed on the tracks. A pronouncement made without proof. A pronouncement that was looking toward a criminal investigation to fill in the blanks. Those blanks remain unfilled, however. The investigation, led first by the county and then by the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, seemed disinclined to accept the initial assessment of murder and surprisingly eager to place the blame for what happened on DJ. The focus was due to false and incomplete information provided by Norfolk Southern Railroad, which for reasons unknown and in defiance of a search warrant appears to have engaged in a callous game of deception. Everyone involved in this investigation failed DJ, failed his heartbroken family, and left them without answers to their most basic questions. That changes today.
Welcome back to FITSFiles, your new home for true crime and corruption wherever you download podcasts. I'm your host, founding editor Will Folks of FITSNews.com. Previously on FITSFiles, our team introduced you to our latest investigation, Death on the Tracks, the story of Daniel Reed, DJ Smith of Dorchester County, South Carolina. This week, we believe we've reached a turning point in this investigation after an independent medical expert reviewed the cause and manner of DJ's death. This review was bolstered by newly discovered evidence into the mysterious circumstances surrounding the night DJ died. Given the graphic details associated with certain parts of this story, we'd like to remind everyone listener discretion is advised. Once again, as DJ's family demands answers, fights for justice, and seeks real accountability, our team is taking this journey along with them, searching for the same things ourselves, searching once again for the truth. Here again, our producer and lead investigator, Jen Wood.
After Daniel Reed Smith's body was discovered lying on a remote section of the train tracks in Dorchester County, Coroner Linda Walsh requested his body be transported to the Medical University of South Carolina for an autopsy to determine the cause and manner of death. This autopsy was conducted on August 12, 2018, by Dr. Nicholas Batalis. According to the notes on the first page of the autopsy, the history provided to Dr. Batalis was that DJ was found next to the tracks, not lying in between the rails. This is just one of many critical inconsistencies in this saga. The coroner kept her report open-ended for several months, pending the outcome of the investigation. What did she expect this investigation to yield? It's not immediately clear. DJ's autopsy described in detail the injuries he suffered, but offered no explanation as to how they were caused. The conclusion, as stated, reads more like a guess, best described as accidental. Those words could be used to describe many scenarios. They lack meaning. They provide nothing of substance. The investigation into DJ's death created uncertainty as opposed to resolving it. It raised more questions than it answered, and it left DJ's family more confused and more frustrated than when it first belatedly began. DJ's family has steadfastly remained open to whatever truth might surface to explain his untimely end, a most difficult commitment considering all that's involved. The night DJ went missing and turned up dead, he was hanging around with a group of people well acquainted with criminal behavior and recreational drug use. As this episode unfolds, we will begin to see how this figures into subsequent events. We will start, though, with newly provided evidence that endeavors to provide answers for the family, some truth they can believe in. What we are going to share came about thanks to a doctor, a trauma expert, whose compassionate, evidence-based analysis answered many of the most pressing questions decisively. The information this doctor provided could mark an important turning point in this case. Here's Callie Lyons to share her findings in their entirety.
I'm a board-certified emergency medicine physician with over 2 decades of experience. After hearing the initial information about DJ's case, I asked to participate in FITSNews' review of the information. As a parent myself, I cannot imagine how painful this is for DJ's parents. Out of respect to DJ, his family, and the hopeful resolution to this case, I'm asking to remain anonymous to keep the focus where it should be, on DJ and his loved ones. This report is intended to provide some observations to a grieving family from the information I was provided by FITSNews. While it could at some point aid the criminal investigation, that is not my intent. Please read this with the understanding that while I have years of experience with traumatic injury patterns, substance use disorder, the human body, and human nature, I am not law enforcement. Nor have I been asked to do this by any law enforcement agency. I would be happy to speak to law enforcement should anyone desire to speak to me. After reviewing the information provided to me, I've come to the following conclusions. DJ was already deceased and was in a horizontal position when the trains passed over him on the tracks. There was extremely little blood on his clothing or on the site. There appears to be some localized blood associated with open wounds, but they are more smear and contact marks, and it is not substantial enough to have occurred while DJ was still living. Due to the lack of blood visible at the site and on his clothing, the patient's death was caused by a mechanism that did not involve external exsanguination. Patients injured by train strikes while standing have a much different injury pattern than DJ's, and much more similar to being the victim of an explosion rather than a car crash. Given the absence of that injury pattern, I do not think he was standing upright and struck by a train. DJ was fatally injured by a motor vehicle while on foot. On the autopsy performed at MUSC, he was noted to have severe trauma to the right side of his thorax and abdomen. All of his right ribs were broken. He had significant spine trauma at the level of the thoracic spine. His right arm was broken. He had severe bleeding into his right chest cavity, and he had significant intra-abdominal injuries also on the right side. Collectively, these injuries were severe enough to cause his death and would not have resulted in any external bleeding. Given the associated visible tire marks on the clothing on the right side of his body, I think this trauma was caused by getting hit by a vehicle, which was ultimately what caused his death. Furthermore, these injuries are so severe that I do not think he would have survived even if EMS had been called. DJ had a linear section of mechanical grease covering his anterior abdomen. I believe this is more consistent with close contact with a vehicle than proximity to a train. Additional injuries to DJ's head and extremities. Lower leg amputation. Given the lack of associated blood on his clothing, this was sustained post-mortem. It was not cut off cleanly, but appears to have been taken off in a torsion pattern. I believe that this was caused by a very slow-moving train, and statistically was likely caused by the first train to pass over him. If his leg was not in a position to be amputated by the first train, it is very unlikely that it would come to be in a different position, given that he was already dead. The train that saw an unidentified mass on the tracks had been held in place, waiting for a train ahead of it to clear the tracks, indicating that it was either at a standstill or very slow moving. I think the train prior to the train with the video footage is likely the first train to pass over him. Right shoulder disarticulation. DJ's right arm was found extended above his head, pointed east on the tracks. His shoulder was essentially disconnected from his body, only being tethered on by skin. While the initial injury to his arm was likely caused by the fatal motor vehicle crash, I believe that injury to have been further exacerbated by being dragged by that arm. I will expound on this in a moment, which ultimately led to the disarticulation and the position of his arm when he was found. Head trauma. DJ had severe head trauma when found. His brain was not present in his head nor at the currently known scene. The majority of his severe head trauma was sustained at another location, and his brain was likely left behind. No tire marks were visible on his head or face, so I think it unlikely that his brain was extruded by a vehicle running over this area of his body. Given this, I do not have a plausible theory as to what caused this severe and extensive head trauma. Some localized blood splatter was found at the site in the area of his head, but again, this was so localized that whatever force or movement caused that, it occurred after his death. The location of DJ's belongings. I think it likely that his bag was partially dragged under the trains, and this accounts for the scatter of his belongings in the eastward direction, consistent with directional travel of the trains that evening. I do not think DJ was wearing his boots at the time he was placed on the tracks. If he were, then his amputated foot would have been in the boot, and they would not have been laying side by side in such a neat pattern. I do not think DJ was wearing his hat when he sustained his head trauma. There is no blood on it. I'm unsure what caused the fairly significant damage to it. Some thoughts on how DJ came to be at this location. Given the isolation of the location of his body, I think it likely that the person who placed him here was very familiar with the area. This was not a spot they came to by happenstance. Given the patient's struggle with methamphetamine use disorder and his social crowd, I think it likely that whoever is responsible for DJ's death is among this crowd. The person who disposed of his body may have a residence or structure of some sort in close proximity to this location. The person who disposed of his body may be involved in the production and trafficking of methamphetamine and may use trains to help transport the product, which would account with the familiarity of this location. The tracks are significantly raised above the ground and are covered in larger stone gravel. How might a full-grown male come to be brought to this elevated location? There are no abrasions on the patient's body or damage to clothing consistent with being dragged across gravel. I think it unlikely that someone would either child's carry or fireman's carry a 160-pound person with a gaping head wound, such as DJ had, up a very steep embankment. I think DJ's body was driven to this location and left between the tracks after he was dead. Unless there is level ground nearby, I think it likely that a vehicle capable of climbing steep rocky terrain was necessary to dispose of his body. DJ did have unevenly spaced linear wounds down his back that appear consistent with being briefly dragged down the tracks to where he was found. There was no open skin, only some bruising, so I don't think he was dragged for more than a few feet. I think DJ was pulled out of the back of a pickup truck by his right arm in a supine position. The height drop out of the truck bed would be enough to cause an already injured arm to disarticulate. This position would also account for the marks on his back. DJ was found to have his knife holder empty and open. The gun that he was well known to carry was not present. While he did have drug paraphernalia in his belongings, had methamphetamine and marijuana in his system, and was in the middle of a severe relapse, he did not have any illicit drugs on him when found. I believe that he was robbed of these things prior to the trains passing over his body.
The conclusions outlined by the doctor explain so much. If you've listened to our previous episodes, you'll recall DJ's body and personal effects were so varied in their conditions, they appeared to be parts of two different crime scenes. We believe they absolutely were. With the doctor's straightforward analysis in hand, we discussed the findings with DJ's stepfather, Eric Melendez. So I am here with Eric Melendez, who stepson Daniel Reed Smith. We have been discussing over the past few episodes of FITSFiles. And we had an independent doctor reach out and offer to take a look at both the photos of the autopsy and the scene and the actual autopsy report itself to see if see if her experience as a trauma and emergency room physician in seeing this type of injuries during her 20-year career aligned with the conclusion of the medical examiner who did the autopsy. So what I want to do is kind of go through this because you have been over the past 5 years basically leading an independent look at the investigation done by both Dorchester County and SLED. And a lot of what the doctor sent back in her report that we're going to go into detail about during the episode, a lot of what her findings were aligned very closely with what you and I have been discussing. And I think it surprised both of us how closely it aligned. So one of the first things I noted on the report is that she believed that when the trains passed over his body, he was in a horizontal position. She said, when I spoke with her, when a train hits a person who's standing, the damage to their body is substantially more. I mean, DJ sustained a lot of serious injuries, but the damage to their bodies is almost like an IED hitting somebody. So that was her conclusion. She also noted that when she reviewed the photos of the scene, the photos of his clothing, that there was very little blood either on his clothing or at the site. So she strongly believes that when DJ made his way to the tracks, he was already deceased, which is something that you have been saying for years. And I wanted to talk to you about how your feelings about this report. Like when you read through this, how did you feel?
Well, I think, going from the top of her report, in her first observation was that in her belief that he was already deceased and lying in a horizontal position on the tracks, and he was between the rails. He wasn't outside the rails of the train. He was laying between them. And that was her first observation, which obviously that train could pass over him many times, and there were 5 trains that passed through that area from the late hours of the 10th of August all day long, August the 11th, until essentially the 6:30 train finds him there. Her other observation is there's hardly no blood on that scene. It's not consistent with, like you indicated on the last report, that his injuries were extensive. And she goes on to mention the fact of his injuries to his shoulder, injuries to his foot. There should have been a tremendous amount of blood loss, on that scene.
Right. And that, I mean, to her, she said that indicates that those injuries were sustained after he died. So they're postmortem injuries. When she reviewed the autopsy report, she said the injuries that actually caused his death were the internal injuries on the right side of his body. So to me, that makes this a whole different ball game, because he was not hit by a train while standing, because his injuries were on the right side of his abdomen, the ones that
Right.
killed him, the internal injuries.
Right.
So, and I kept going back to, well, what if he was laying on the tracks? And she said he did not die in that location. He died elsewhere and was placed on the tracks because his internal injuries, which killed him, were on the right side of his abdomen and could not have been, he could not have been hit by the train standing, or else there would have been blood everywhere.
I agree with her. I believe that there was another incident location, another crime scene, and that this
Mm-hmm.
was a dumping spot for his body. The location where he was found did not match his injuries. The crime scene or the incident location where he was found didn't match anything, and he should have had a lot of blood loss on that scene, and he did not. And like I'd always kind of pled to the investigators, his right side being pretty much receiving most of the impact that would have killed him from head to toe. I'll just use head to toe. Those impact injuries, they did. Those are impact injuries that were not consistent with a train striking him.
Right.
Their injuries as though if you were to run into a wall and bump the wall hard enough to where it may not make a bruise, but it hurts the inside of your body. An impact, so to speak, like playing football and getting hit by a defensive tackle. That's an impact. It doesn't do anything to the body itself, but it does it causes damages to the inside. And
Right.
whereas if the train would have struck him doing 45 miles an hour, it generally would catapult you, off the tracks or under the train, and the results of that would be catastrophic to the external part of the body.
Right. Right. And a lot of what she said because, when you look at this story and you look at this case, you have questions like, okay, well, is this possible? Is this possible? And every answer she gave me was like, it is not possible because he did not die in that location. There's absolutely no way. So I went back and I looked at the original autopsy and noted that the medical examiner who conducted it had been given information by Dorchester County that DJ was found next to the tracks.
That's right.
And we know based on crime scene photos and incident reports that he was found lying between the rails.
Correct.
When you attend, in your experience as an investigator, you've attended many autopsies. What information is important to give to the medical examiner for successful report?
So everything of the autopsies that I've attended, many, I would bring them the facts of the case, basically what happened, when it happened. If I had any scene photographs, I would generally bring those with me so that the pathologist would have a general idea as to how the body was found, the position of the body when it was found. So that they have some general idea as to what this victim went through upon his death or her death. And I think that that's vital to the success of a good diagnosis or ending to an autopsy. Because in this particular case right here, it would be my opinion that Dr. Patalis that did the autopsy, he made a remark that, he had more blood in his system than what he should have had based on the wounds that he sustained, which
Right.
is, go ahead. I know what you're thinking.
I mean, that it's all through there. I mean, did any of the investigating officers attend the autopsy or?
So I think Sumi Simmons, she received most of the evidence, his clothing that he was wearing at the time of his autopsy, the blood spot, the things that normally personal effects and things like that. And then there are some, fingernail clippings and things like that that are taken for evidentiary value for later use as DNA and whatnot comes into play. She signed for those, so I would have assumed that she was present during the autopsy and that therefore she signed for those items in a chain of custody and they were put into evidence. Okay. But whether or not the information that was provided, I don't know, because when I see the report from the coroner's office where they told the pathologist that his body was found outside the tracks, that's incorrect. Right. That's not where he was found. So it kind of leads me to believe that there were no answers provided to any questions that the pathologist may have had. And I don't know that she provided any information to him about the scene other than the fact that, a train struck him. I wish I had more for that part of it, but I don't believe that they got it. Go ahead.
And one thing that you noted, as we've been going through all of this, I mean, we're talking hundreds of pages of evidence, photos, is that DJ's pants, there are some very interesting markings on it that, we're going to try and get those analyzed by somebody who's, is familiar with investigations like this, but they look like tire treads. I mean, and the doctor who reviewed this for us agreed that, in her experience, when she handles car versus pedestrian accidents, she sees that on clothing often. So I thought that was really interesting that she had noticed that as well.
Yeah, so I try and never suggest anything to anyone. When I get a case, for instance, if I were to have ever got a cold case or an investigation and somebody had prior knowledge as to what happened, I generally don't want them to give me any opinions of it, even if they have knowledge of it. I don't want to know. I just like to get all of the information and evidence and read it and come up with my own thoughts and my notes as I review it. And so in his particular case, it took a while for me after looking at his scene photos where I noticed the right side. Once again, we're focused on the right side of his body where all the impact is coming in. He clearly has a very consistent pattern down that right leg of his pants. And when you look at the impression is, you can put a scale on the impression and they're all the same size. So that tells me that it was a tire. And it's and you can see where the impression is intersecting with one another like a tire would. So I put together the presentation that I sent you, just kind of illustrate number one, injuries consistent with a pedestrian auto. They're very unique where those injuries usually end up, on elbows and the back of the head. Those are very consistent, depending on the height, the speed of the vehicle at the time of the impact, all kind of dictates what you could expect injury wise. But when you look at Daniel or DJ's injuries, they are very consistent. When I put the presentation together, I used 2 case studies I found on the internet where they were pedestrian auto, and I put photographs of his injuries, and I put the photographs of the victims of those collisions next to his. And if I didn't illustrate which one was which, I think that there would be mistaken identity. You wouldn't know which one. Yeah, go ahead.
And that's what, when I sent everything over to the doctor to review, she immediately said, this looks way more like he was hit by a car than any train collision I've ever seen. And she also noted, we don't want to give a lot of details about the crime scene because in our eyes, despite the fact that investigators have closed this case and deemed it accidental, in our eyes, it's not closed. So we don't want to give away a lot, but she said, his boots were not on his feet. And she said that with his leg injury, his boot would have been still on his feet. Why would he take his, and we're going out to the scene Wednesday to get a better sense of, where it happened, what it looks like. But where he was walking was very gravelly. He's not going to just take his boots off and set them aside and lay down. It just doesn't make any sense. And she said, the way that, his boots were high, the train impact would not have knocked him out of those boots. It would have been impossible. Which I thought was just everything that we've been, talking about and you've been thinking over the past 5 years, she noticed immediately.
Yeah. And these, like she indicated, the injuries that he sustained on that right side would have caused his death. But those injuries, I believe, are, I think when it all comes down to it, they were of, mechanical means through an automobile. That would be just my gut impression, and I know that we're working on that, and I'm working on some things on my end to kind of further that theory. But based on even just the doctors, just in review of the facts of what she's seen and then what she surmised of what she has saw, you can't really argue with all of that experience. It's such a tremendous amount of experience that she has, that even, she makes mention about the train passing over him, that none of that just really makes any sense. We should have had a bigger crime scene out there, or a bigger scene at the location where he's found it. It's just not there.
It never happened.
Yeah, it's never been there.
Right.
Um, I think, that he had, in my opinion, I think he had, without giving away everything, I mean, he had automobile grease oil on him.
Right.
Last time I checked, trains don't generally have a great deal of that underneath them, and especially where it is on his body. And last time I checked, trains don't have tires.
Right.
Steel wheels. I mean, where the tire impression is on his pants, consistent with the loss of his limb, that's consistent with, to me, with him being struck by a motor vehicle.
I
It would be
agree.
yeah. So
I mean, what's always struck me about when I speak with you is you've always been open to the idea that, maybe DJ maybe he did get hit by a train. You've always been open to the fact that that is or was a possible conclusion, but you said, but based on based on my experience, on my investigative experience, and based on what I saw at the scene, I don't think that is what happened. So, I mean, I think having somebody with some medical background really helped me, because I would keep going back to what if, what if, what if, and she would say there is no what if here. He did not die at this location. It is absolutely impossible for that to have happened. So I guess to me it really did help me kind of put aside those what ifs. And in the end, they determined his death was accidental, rather than his manner of death, rather than undetermined or, homicide. And that essentially closed the case.
yeah, I'll tell you, Jen. I mean, from the very onset of his death, things began to, come in. The anonymous call, saying that he was killed. I've worked hundreds of deaths and investigations, and have I ever got a hang up call with somebody telling me that somebody was killed? No, but it's
Right.
highly unlikely that somebody called and provided that information and then hung up. That there had to be some truth to it, and there's
Right.
been bits and pieces of all of this over a 5-year period about him being killed. Him being put in a plastic bag. There are, facts that you and I are aware of that
Mm-hmm.
people have said to these investigators. David Owen, Detective Blanchard, Detective Simmons were all told bits and pieces of what happened to him. But I'm just going to tell you, and I hate to be blunt, and it's nothing personal to these people. I've done this job a long time. I'm not perfect. I don't mind anybody ever looking at my investigations, but the facts were there the whole time. They just refused to listen. I couldn't tell
Right.
you. Every time I sat down with them, I begged and pleaded them to do the right thing. Uh, and I knew that when I got their case files, that we would go through them and just, and read them for what they were. And just like I've always told my wife, had I read through the case files and concluded that they did a thorough investigation and there was no question that, he was killed accidentally by that train, I would be the first one to admit it.
Right.
I'm not critical of anyone's work. However, that is not the case with him. And what this doctor has done has confirmed so much for me and made me so much more confident in what I've read. Not that I started to doubt my thoughts, but I did,
But it isn't easy to do with this. I mean, because you go, what if? What if? I mean, it's very complicated. And for me, it was for the first time I was able to look at this and put those what ifs aside and start thinking thinking now, like she said, now what we need to do is figure out how they got him there and why they took him there. So that's why we're going to go out to the tracks on Wednesday and take a look at the scene, because when you look at the scene from, Google satellite imagery, it's very remote. But if you also look at it, there's side roads that go almost right up to where he was left.
Right.
So it is absolutely not possible. And from what we know, it wasn't just one person involved in moving him after he died. So it's absolutely possible. And I think to say it isn't, when I saw those side roads, because I initially read the report from the first responding officers when the train called in the body on the tracks, and it stopped, and it took them a good mile to stop that train. And they said they parked at the intersection and walked a mile and a half up to the scene. And I was thinking, well, why wouldn't they just go up one of these side roads and get close? It was presented almost from the start that it would have been impossible. And I don't think it was. So I think we need to go out there and take a look at the scene and show that it is not impossible.
Yeah, and I've walked it several times, and I've always asked myself, that's a long way to take somebody.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of other opportunities and places to, dump a body. I've worked a lot of the homicides in my years as a detective, and I've seen a lot of people do a lot of crazy things that, people will do things, especially when you commit murder. They're going to do what they have to do to eliminate themselves from that. And a lot of these people, go ahead.
I think, we also need to look at the fact that I think a lot of these people were on drugs at the time. So even rational thinking, I don't even think we can think rationally. We need to put even that aside. But I do think it's important to, see it in person and know, like for people to see it too and know that it isn't possible. It isn't impossible.
Yeah, I agree. And there are, like you said, there are multiple people involved, and those people, they're more than capable of, when you got your adrenaline going, when you got your life ahead of you and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do, you're going to do some things that would not be on the normal side of life to try and hopefully eliminate. And I think that was the intent. Their intent was to eliminate him, and maybe they suspected that he'd never be found, and that is a good possibility. That he would have
We may say it's not rational, but it's 5 years, and everybody's, for the most part, still. Nobody's been held accountable for this, so it may not seem rational to us, but it worked.
Yeah, it did. They think. Yeah, they think
so far.
Yeah,
they think it worked, but
yeah.
Did this give you or Lisa any sense of peace? Because I know that the doctor, when I spoke with her, said she really wanted to make sure that, especially his mom, knew that the internal injuries that he sustained that caused his death were significant and almost, she said, it was very important for her to know that it was instant and unsurvivable. Does it give you any sense of relief, peace, reading this?
When I think about him, and I think about his last moments of his life, you talked about him not having his shoes on. That young man, his mother raised him well. He always took his shoes off whenever he came to my house, or he was ever at his sister's house or anyone's house. He always took his boots off. That was a habit of his. and he was taught that way. But all of this is just, it hasn't brought me any closure. It's just brought reality to what, I thought all along that, he was killed somewhere else. I think, he wouldn't have been, like you said, those rocks are treacherous, and the distance that he would have had to travel, even if you got tired and laid down, those rocks are brutal to you. And there was nothing that would have led you to believe that, he just camped out, and decided, oh, I'm going to get some shut eye here. That's not the case. And protecting some of the integrity of the case, we wouldn't dare, discuss that scene. But it does give me closure. But I hate to think that this is the way he died. And discarded like a piece of trash. Because that's what they did is, I'm just going to tell you, these people that killed him, they think they have gotten away with it. I'm confident that I know who they are. And we're not going to give up, until we have justice, until I can face them in a courtroom at their bond hearings. I'm disappointed that I don't have the legal authority in the state to investigate my own son's death and then make the arrest myself, because there was nothing that I would want more. This doctor has just kind of put everything in perspective for me. She's put everything out there that I didn't know. I didn't know. I mean, I had an autopsy report from Dr. Patalis, but her observations and notes are, in my opinion, I couldn't ask for anything more accurate than what she has done here.
Yeah.
So,
well, we're going to keep pressing on. We're going to go take a look at that scene Wednesday, and we'll have that up next week. And hopefully we're going to keep pushing for answers, keep pushing for accountability, for justice, so that you guys can get some closure.
Yeah. And we, from all of our family, I'm an emotional guy sometimes, and I try not to be, but from the bottom of our heart, I can tell you how much my family and myself just appreciate all that you've done and everything that everybody has done for us and what they continue to do. Support FITSNews, support this story, because Daniel, he's my stepson. He's my wife's only son. And there were probably many like him that things like this tragically have happened to them, and they lie without justice, and that's what we want. We want justice for him. We want justice for everyone. So,
right.
But we really appreciate and love you all to death, and we thank you for all you do.
Well, thank you for trusting me and just helping me tell the story. It's been a pleasure, an honor.
Absolutely, and I look forward to seeing you Wednesday.
Our investigation is far from over. With these findings, we are more determined than ever to find out what happened to DJ and to advocate on behalf of him and his family. To that end, we will be paying a visit to the tracks, to the precise location where he was found, in the hopes of gaining clues and perspective that could lead to the identification of those responsible, and hopefully the presentation of charges that prosecutors can take before a jury. Stay tuned for more on that visit in future episodes. In the meantime, the doctor who so kindly reviewed this report asked us to share the following with DJ's parents and our audience.
To DJ's parents, I am so sorry for your loss. May your love and story be a light to others and encourage others to wellness and peace. We all will be affected by substance use in some fashion. Substance use disorder is devastating to the patient suffering it, their loved ones, and the impact on our society as a whole. Patients with substance use disorder are at high risk of a host of additional health problems. Bloodborne infections, age-related diseases accelerated by poor nutrition and additional physiological stressors, mental health disorders either caused by and or complicating the substance use, organ damage, and a higher risk of traumatic injuries due to high-risk decisions and situations. If you're suffering from substance use disorder, please set aside the shame and fear and ask for help. You are not the only one. Many have gone before you and gotten into recovery. To this day, the most successful treatment programs are Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. Both are free and readily available. You can likely find a meeting now. All you need to do is the next right step. Go to a meeting. If you are the loved one of a substance user, the best thing you can do for your loved one is to get as healthy as possible to support them in a loving, healthy way. You are not the first loved one to deal with this. Please go to Al-Anon or Alateen, regardless of your loved one's desire to get into recovery.
For DJ's mother, who has suffered all of these things 1,000,000 times over, she has remained stuck in a moment in time that defied explanation. She always wondered about DJ's final moments. Did he lay there on the tracks, agonizing, calling out for her? So many nights she has been unable to sleep, haunted by those helpless thoughts, like so many mothers who have lost their children under horrific or horrifically unexplained circumstances. After talking to the doctor, for the first time we were able to tell Lisa that the internal injuries DJ sustained during the first assault on his body were not survivable. His death was quick. It happened in an instant. He did not suffer.
So finally, after all this time, we have something resembling clarity on at least one of the questions surrounding DJ's death. And while that may not get us any closer to an ultimate answer or accountability, it is some small consolation to a still grieving mother. You've been listening to FITSFiles, a true crime and corruption podcast written, directed, and produced by FITSNews. We're the team that first broke the Murdoch Murders crime and corruption saga and the Cheer Incorporated sex abuse scandals wide open. I'm Will Folks, along with producer and lead investigator Jen Wood, special projects director Dylan Nolan, researcher Callie Lyons, and the rest of our team. We're bringing you this series of investigative reports in which we uncover layers of truth lurking beneath the surface, in which we offer exclusive interviews and insight, provide critical background and context, and reveal previously unreported details. If you appreciate independent journalism, please support our work by subscribing to FITSNews.com. There you can view our original reporting, browse all the case files, and be the first to receive breaking news on all the stories we cover. Your support makes everything we do possible. Your subscription helps us hold those in power accountable. So please, subscribe today. That's FITSNews.com. And while you're at it, please like us on the podcast platform of your choice and consider leaving a review.